Good afternoon. I'm Jenna Poland with CVS Health, and I'm the Director of Profit Recovery there. So just a little bit about myself. I've been with CVS for 6 years. I have a team of 19, includes auditors, managers, and we do audits internally within CVS at NUT, and then also with our third-party audit teams. And our audits span anywhere from AP audits to contract compliance, lease audits, and the retail front store space promotional audits. So today's discussion, we're going to talk about, I have to do this. Waiting for you. Okay. So today's discussion, we're going to talk about the importance of email auditing and recovery audits. So just as a roundtable, how many of you have experience with auditing with emails? Perfect. So why is it important? A couple of reasons. With profit recovery, there's historically been a huge focus on maximization of recovery dollars. Recently we've kind of moved towards, we're trying to accelerate our audits, and then also ensuring we have accuracy in those audits and with the documentation that's supporting the claims. We also want to make sure that we're adding value back to the company. So having proof and documentation in the emails, we can offer that back to the departments where the claim came from to say, this is where, we have a gap. Especially in our current environment. So going through the pandemic, a lot of the agreements that would happen between a buyer and the seller in merchandising, it would happen across the desk. So it's CVS. I remember back when I was on the vendor side, I was with Johnson & Johnson for years, we would go to CVS and we'd meet with category managers, and that's where a lot of the conversations would happen over the desk. There may have been like a follow-up with an email afterwards, but a lot of those conversations happened there. After the pandemic, there was a real focus on, emailing back and forth, and you can kind of see, how those conversations developed and then what they finally aligned on. Some of the benefits of emailing is that you're recovering more dollars. So these are some statistics from my business. From 2020 to 2021, we actually saw a 15% increase in email audits that we were doing. And then between 21 and 22, we saw a 65% increase. And that's on the dollar amount of email audits, which actually doubled during that time. And that's the media year, so that's not necessarily the audit year. So that was probably right during the pandemic where we saw that. So there's a great importance of reviewing emails to support some of those claims. Improving claim accuracy. So a claim is 4.5 times more likely to be approved by the vendor if it has an email as part of the supporting documentation. So that's a statistic that I actually received from Auditing. I don't want to take credit for that, but that is really fascinating to have that sort of statistic as far as improving claim accuracy. Defining and the scope of email auditing. So in the context of recovery audits, an email can be the basis of the recovery itself that actually drove the claim, or it could be, using an email search to find support for a claim. So it can be the starting point, or it can be used to have that support. Scope of information available in email communication. So there's many things that you can learn when reading through these emails. You can learn about, the agreements, the contracts, have documentation, new contact names, email addresses. So you actually gain all that knowledge about what's going on with your business. There also might be like a shift in a buyer for a category, or you learn about new programs or new items, new vendors. One key watch out is ensure you have the latest email in a series, because as you go through your email where you might think that you have an agreement, the very last email might say, I'm sorry, we can't support this for whatever reason. So it's important to have that last email in the series. Ensure you look also far enough before and after the program or event date. So if you have a program, a seasonal, markdown program running, you want to make sure that you look early enough to that date, because that's where where the funding agreements will happen. It could be 6 to 9 months before that time, and then also after the event date. So if funding wasn't collected, then you can actually see, maybe they did collect it afterwards. So it's important that you don't narrow the scope of the time when you're doing those email searches, that you keep it kind of open. There's different types of email auditing techniques. I keep forgetting that I have to do this, I'm sorry. There's the content analysis. So one recommendation is to use parent queries with present words that can customize with the brand or the vendor name or the category / buyer name, depends what you call it, and domain. So these parent queries will help, organize your queries, but then you can customize it and you can specify those individual names. And I'll get into more examples of how we're doing that. Also, communication pattern analysis. You can focus on a specific area and identify patterns of communication and program specific words and timing. So if you're focusing on, let's say like new item allowances, and then you find that there's different patterns in the communication, and you can kind of find either another email that you're looking for, or you can find a pattern so that you can do an additional search, and that might offer some additional opportunities. Some advanced search techniques include the domain, the vendor or broker of record. So that ensures that you have vendor confirmation other than just internal communication only. So you can do a search on a program that you're doing, but if you include the vendor, let's say Johnson & Johnson of record, then you have that ability to kind of narrow your search to what you're looking for. Be proactive in your advanced search techniques. So you can accumulate some accurate domains, vendor contacts. So you want to maintain those lists, the buyers and specialist changes. Also, vendor added dates and specific program terms. So I have here an example, a case study. This is identifying additional claims. So this is a CVS recovery 6S where we had a multi-year agreement. So on the right, there was an email that was identified and the vendors blocked out, but it's showing that there was a 15% trade accrual for 19 and 20 for those 2 years. But in the fine print, when you read through it, it says that they will, over the course of the agreement, they will continue to refresh the planogram as needed through the calendar year of 2022. So this finding actually, based on the percentage of net purchases in 2021, generated a recovery of $683,000. This was a very large one. And we always get the vendor's sign off. So this is approved by the vendor and also the buyer for this particular example. Sometimes these multi-year agreements can be overlooked. Sometimes the buyer will change the category manager from desk to desk. So it's, sometimes they're on a leave of absence. We've had, people are on maternity leave or they no longer with the company. So then you have, people sharing, one person kind of managing 2 different desks. And when I say desk, I mean like a category, like hair care, healthcare, different things. So you want to make sure that you're looking at these multi-year contracts and filing them so you can make sure it happens year over year. Ensuring accuracy in claims. So this is how email auditing can provide additional context for claims. When there's a pattern that's created or a trend, you can investigate other opportunities. So again, looking at particular contact names or emails, like if that's that person that maybe went on a leave of absence, looking for that person's additional deals that may have not have been recorded in the funding system. Also, reducing false positives, improving accuracy. So this assists with claim validation. and minimizing payback. So we actually had over the past 3 years a 5% improvement on the payback rate because of emails. Having email documentation is part of our claim. It really does help and minimize the payback rate. Here's another case study where CVS had success, and this is on an enhanced claim research through email auditing. So at CVS, we have had things called like BDF, business development funds, that rate, or we have SAFE, which was the funding agreement with the vendors. So if you search on those specific words, you know, we were able to come up with this particular example. So on the right was the email. So this is a case where there were 2 SKUs. So it was a brand of hair care that was actually moving from one vendor to another vendor. So vendor A to vendor B. And in this example, it was a safe setup form. So these 2 SKUs were being shifted to a different vendor. And there was a commitment for those that was like a 3.75%, what we call business development fund rate. So that carried over to 2022, and it was $136,000 that was identified that was due to CVS. And again, that was vendor approved. So it's important to really just, you know, you can do the word searches in emails, but you really have to read through them and comprehend and read kind of between the lines, but also get, you know, approval and verification from the vendor as far as what the intent is. I'll just take a break. Any questions on the 2 case studies that I've gone through so far? And you can ask questions.
You may not have this at the top, you know, the top of your mind, but are these 2 case studies, were they instances in which you identified the issue with an email, or were they the kind of that latter one where you had identified the issue some other way, but were using the email to support it?
So in this case, I believe this one was because we have a BDP or a business development fund contract audit. So ensuring that the 3.75% was taken. So what we found was that those SKUs actually shifted over to a different vendor. So we used the email as support for this.
Nice.
Yeah. And on the other one, this one was, honestly, I don't know if it was the same things. So it could have been. For the most part, they utilize the email system for support for claims. But sometimes they actually go in and you look for a certain program.
Your vendor agreements, you call them vendor trade agreements or trade vendor agreements. Are they formal signed documents between you and the vendor?
No. So they had changed it's called the VFM. It's a vendor fund management system. And that's where all of the events and deals are managed. And the vendor can go in. Some of the vendors that are approved to kind of go in, they can go in and accept the terms of the agreement, but most of them are offline. Yeah.
And how often are those refreshed? Is it
every year?
It is.
Yeah, annually. So the deals and events will be refreshed every year.
Those standards by category that helps to, you know, in one area versus another, where 50% versus like 3.5% start off of, or everything is pretty much negotiable?
It's all customized. It really all depends. So I would say by business unit, there are similarities, like in the healthcare area or in the beauty area, there are similarities in how the funding is structured, but it's really all different. A lot of vendors are also moving to like an all-in funding rate or a dead net rate, versus paying for each individual, you know, type of promotional plan. It really depends, because you have vendors that are all different, you know, sizes. You could have a small vendor, very, very large vendor that plays in many categories. It really depends. Yeah. Question. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a quick one, Jenna.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of things. In the past, one thing I've run into is buyers change when key contacts change. They're not updated in the system, and who's being captured, who's being tracked in the email system. Has your team been able to develop any types of best practices you've been and help you make sure that you keep a list of whose emails you're tracking?
Right.
Okay.
We work with the merchandising team, so in that BFM system, they're supposed to be updating, you know, the contacts, and as they switch from one category to the other, they're updating it. So we do a refresh, but sometimes it's, you know, and then when we're doing a post audit, so going back a year or 2 years, it's whoever was in place at that time, which they might not be with the company anymore, they might have changed it. So that's where it becomes a challenge. It's like, what was that, you know, who was that person and what was that agreement at that time? So it is, so that's where I think emails become beneficial, because you can also search to see, okay, who was on the hair care business back in, you know, December of 2021.
So are you looking at all emails globally, or are they limited to specific?
So it's the inbound and outbound of the, we call them custodians, but it's the email addresses of the predominantly the merchandising team or the analyst team that, you know, completes all the events and deals in the system, in the VFM system. So we will see kind of who the outbound folks are. Yeah. Perspective. Okay, so improving the vendor experience with email auditing. So this helps with vendor collaboration and communication. So really, when you have the documentation to support your claim, it can lead to faster recoveries. It also reduces ambiguity and also adds a level of validation. When I first started at CVS, all of the claims post audits were manual. So the auditors would come into my office and they would need to get a signature from me. And it was a packet, a clean packet with a cover sheet and all the backup. And I remember looking at the backup saying, well, where's the agreement? And they're like, well, what do you mean? It's that's what we bill for. So that's where it becomes really beneficial, is to have all of the documentation. So that became increasingly important. And I stress the importance of having all the agreements and the emails with that. After that, we automated all of the post audits, and we had electronic versions and everything. So I always said to the team, you know, if this dropped on the floor and if someone picked it up, they would know exactly what you were going for, you know, the dollar amount, what was billed, what should have been billed, and where's the agreement. So that's kind of the perfect case scenario. It's not always like that. But that's where, you know, having that documentation helps reduce that level of, you know, is it valid or invalid? Some success stories where email audits, they actually enhance vendor trust. So when you work with a vendor and you have the email as support, it's very beneficial to have that, because they're like, okay, I trust them. They actually did the research. It's right there. It says that, you know, my company was responsible for that payment and it wasn't collected or it wasn't paid. So that's very helpful. Also, accelerating recovery audits can also improve vendor relationships and trust in an audit team. So having the ability to just prove your claim immediately and not have that back and forth, well, now the vendor's got to go search and see if this was actually, you know, valid, if they have the agreement. It's a lot easier if we provide that documentation up front. The email audits help expedite the audit process, and vendor validation becomes easier. When training and implementing emails and audits, you want to make sure that you train the staff on effective email auditing techniques. So you want to set up specific queries that could be further customized. So if you set up you know, we have queries that are set up for like new item allowances, but they can further, you know, drill down on, okay, I want to look at this particular vendor, or I want to look at this particular, you know, category or this domain, or you're able to drill down. And probably, Rich, a lot of what you said about, you know, looking at keywords and keyword searches and everything. So to have that specific series query set up, but then have the ability to customize it for your audit team. Integrating email auditing into existing recovery audit process. So you can use emails, as I mentioned earlier, as a starting point or as support for recovery claim. And really, we do both. I actually like to search for contracts and agreements up front. I find that it's easier to have that documentation first and then do the audit from there. But sometimes we find that, our funding rate wasn't collected, and then we look for the support for it afterwards.
So we do have an online question.
Okay.
Jump in. So it says, with the success of email auditing, has there been a push to try and centralize agreements from the post-audit group to category managers?
There's definitely a need to centralize the contracts and the agreements. That's something that, has been recommended to merchandising. I think by business unit, each merchandising group has their own kind of focus and library of contracts and agreements. We don't have a central place. We kind of collect those agreements, throughout the year that we're going to be auditing. But there definitely is a push for that and a key recommendation for the merchandising team. So ensuring privacy and legal compliance. So you want to make sure that you address these two areas. And you want to ensure that you're abiding by ethical and legal practices. So as you have all of these emails, you want to ensure, number one, that your auditors are, ensuring that they have confidentiality and privacy. They're only focusing on the audits that they should be looking at, and not looking to see kind of what this person's doing on a Friday night. Not that they should be emailing that, but it's funny, like there'll be like an agreement, and then I'm like, oh, going off on it. Anyway, but I mean, it's just, business relationships. But you want to ensure that you stay focused on what you're auditing, and maintaining that level of compliance with legal and internal audit guidelines. So I can't stress the importance of that enough. And one thing that we're working with our compliance team on is getting automated data pulls quarterly, so that we're not having to pull, the emails, that we have a list of custodians that they pull just those custodians. It's a hefty list, it's like 200, but they pull those and they deliver them to us, and then we have the ability to search through that list, as opposed to having access to emails across the whole system. Proactive ways to ensure compliance with data protection regulations. So this includes having, non-disclosure agreements with your third-party audit teams. Also ensuring that you're safeguarding data storage, and you're complying with the right transmission methods for your company. And also pulling only relevant data for your audits. Any questions on either one of those two areas?
How do you ensure, Jenna, that you are, with the turnover that exists in the merchant group, which is really the target of your, sure that when desk changes or something new comes in, that's.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we get a list of merchandising contacts. It gets updated, I would say like once a quarter, to the best of our ability. But because we're pulling emails from like the prior year, I would say that we have a good list of, yeah. And that's one of the things that you just have to stay on top of and connect with the directors and merchandising. I stalk LinkedIn. That's how I find out who my contacts are. I know, kind of, they're like, oh, I have a new role. And I'm like, where did they go? So like, having that ability, because it doesn't always reflect immediately in the system. Yeah. So I really don't stalk with LinkedIn, but I do notice.
Everybody adjust your privacy settings.
I just stalk Ben. So here's a summary of some key points. There's many benefits, right, of email auditing in recovery audits, but one is that it helps accelerate the recovery process. I have to say that we've accelerated by like 2 months our recovery process, and I think email, having the supporting documentation, has helped considerably. Also enhancing the quality of the audit, and then building trust with vendors. And I think vendors and buyers, category managers, really like when they don't have to these disputes aren't circulating. Everyone's like looking for documentation that if you have it up front, that's a key win right up front. And also the potential for increased coverage and improved claim research. So the statistic that you guys should all remember when you walk away from this presentation is that a claim is 4.5 times more likely to be approved by the vendor if it has an email as part of the supporting documentation. I really like that fun fact. So. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, so no, that's a good fact. And I have to say that, you know, one thing that Auditech has helped my team considerably with was we were faced with, you know, migrating from our old email system to the O365 system, and it was over like a period of a year. So we had emails from 2 different systems that, you know, we were able to pull them out in PSTs, but we really didn't have a good way to search on those emails from 2 different systems. So it was really great that we had the Auditech tool inquiry to be able to, you know, pull that information together to do those searches. So that was super helpful and very user-friendly to pull those searches. So I just wanted to kind of share that. That's what we're currently using.
So one question I think I get a lot on this space is, and I don't know how involved you were with it because it may have already been in place before, but I know Chuck, you also were heavily involved with the Best Buy side. Pushback that you get within the organization around the collection. So I mean, just aside from the IT kind of security concerns, how is that kind of addressed? You know, where, you know, maybe a buyer doesn't love the idea that their emails are theoretically being collected and reviewed and audited. Is that something you either of you bumped into with either Best Buy or CVS?
No.
We tell them straight up when they're hired that their emails are monitored.
Okay.
We monitor all of them by buyer and by company. It's a little bit different. Quick question that's a little abstract, but you said vendor approved. Do you not auto deduct? We auto deduct.
We do. We have an agreement with merchandising that anything over 100,000, we will get vendor approval. And if it's not the vendor, the category, we call it the category manager, but the buyer, we have their approval just because it's a large dollar amount that's going to impact the P&L. So we want to get that approval up front. So, but we deduct. And then we have some vendors that we have an agreement with. We call them bill out vendors, but we have 30 days to review. So we have with some of our very large vendors, we have that. They have 30 days or 45 days to review the claims. And then if they don't,
we notify them and give them 30 days prior to deducting. If they dispute it, it still gets deducted.
Oh, okay. So if
And then you bring it out after you've deducted it, right?
yeah. So we have it's actually called a program called Audit 360 that I created, but it's, you know, from the time the claim is created and you conduct all the research and then it gets processed and then there's, you know, it's like a wheel. And then if it's disputed, you know, the team has a certain amount of days, the team meaning the audit team,
Right.
To go ahead and manage through those disputes and get back to them. That's the challenge. That's the part of the life cycle of a claim that we definitely strive to reduce, you know, that area. Yeah.
Is there a certain level, I mean, the category manager, buyer, in the merchandising structures that you stop at, that you don't audit? Like I know there's a buyer, buyer's boss, whether it's a, you know, DMM or some other kind of management piece. At what level do you stop going up to, or you do like, if somebody runs the whole, I'm gonna say beauty area, do you go to the whole head of beauty and down, or is it just buyers and down?
Do you mean for email searches?
Yeah.
Oh, I would say mostly, like, most of the agreements happen at the category manager level, so we will, yeah. Yeah. But in the email search, we might also add the DMM's name because they might, depending, have approval levels or something like that. But for the most part, we're auditing, you know, the programs that are in place, or there are different types of audits that we have, like whether it's seasonal markdowns or, you know, discos or whatever it is. Yeah.
We will capture that at the highest levels. And it'll sometimes come into play when there's a specific like model number you might be searching. I have an example tomorrow.
Oh, that's why we can wait till that. I just, all of these things now actually kind of. This,
Right.
we haven't gotten into it, but we did, okay, where would I do it from a merchandising perspective? And who, and I kind of.
Well, so your list of custodians would include anything from a DMM or even the BPMM level down to like the buyer, and then also like even the analysts that are working in the merchandising group. So you want to make sure that you're including all this because they all might be part of the email chain that you want to make sure that you include. Yeah.
I just didn't know how some of the executive level felt about it, or if there was any pushback when you got to a certain point with some of them.
They see the value.
Maybe now I will, now that they all know. Just bringing it up. You're right. Yeah. So I mean, this is adding to their, what BTL too, but it's adding to their funding line for dollars that were missed that were and they're they're rated on that. So they want to ensure that it's collected as well. Yeah. They don't like paybacks as much. And that's negatively going to impact. So we definitely want to make sure that we have all the supporting documentation up front. That's like key win, building trust and, partnerships within and outside of the organization. Yes. Right.
I wonder most likely typically.
So, yeah, so I think we were looking at emails anyway as support, but I feel like it just was more extreme, like having those conversations, not across a desk. And it's like the whole conversation, like, hey, we were thinking of doing this program, before it was maybe just like the follow-up meeting to like the meeting they had in person. But here you can kind of see the whole type of agreement unfold, like from an idea to, what the agreement actually was. So I definitely think that there was an impact in that. And because I was on the vendor side, with Johnson & Johnson, consumer products. So, going into like CVS and like, I was on the, managing trade fund side, but going in with the salespeople to those meetings, and it was like seeing those conversations happen live in front of me. And then there's like a follow-up. It's very different now. So yeah. Yeah, I think definitely a greater important. And even now people work, hybrid. So they're in the office a couple days, they might meet with them, or people just aren't traveling as much, I feel like, for these types of.
We started emailing in 2008.
Email audits, yeah.
And volume claims potentially went up similarly.
Yeah.
Not to get ahead of myself, but tomorrow, we're now managing IMs for teams.
Yeah.
And we're writing claims. I'm not,
So these are like IMs, like internally within your own.
Actually, externally, you can start to teams, yeah, like
Okay.
I have some clients I'll talk to sometimes on teams,
Oh.
theoretically, and you guys are seeing deals kind of being done and. Okay,
we're a huge.
interesting. Yeah.
No, that's happening too.
Oh. Interesting. And Jenny, I was gonna ask you a question, again, leading question, but you came from the vendor side, prior to being at CVS. I mean, how does that, how is it from on the other side? So when you're getting a claim that's either unsupported, poorly supported, or well supported, how does that reflect, on the company when you're, as a vendor?
So I would review the post audits and meet with my predecessor. And so we used to receive a lot of different post audits because we played in many different categories. And I think one year I had about $1 million that I disputed that I won successfully. But because it didn't have the proper documentation, and from the documentation I had, it wasn't supported. So that was a great learning moment for me now being in this position, to have those in place. So was that your question?
No, I mean, I think it leads to that. I mean, just the idea that if, as on the vendor side, if someone's coming to you and they've done that research and you can actually see that, you know, they have the supporting conversations to be able to say this is an issue, that's a better spot to be in, right? I mean, there's some trust level where if not, you know, then especially when generally, even my experience is it's very rare that either of the people who negotiated the deal are still sitting in their seats. You know, and so, you know, having something tangible is always preferable to just.
Yeah, and I've seen since that time, there's been a shift towards, you know, how the agreements are structured, where in the past it was like, okay, we paid for, you know, shelf space, we paid for this, we paid for that. Now there's like larger like funding rates and all-in rates and everything, so it's different in how it's structured. And so I think there's more like contract driven today than it was back then. So where they might have just billed me for, you know, everything. And then I would dispute each of those with the contracts that I had. So.
Information sharing within your team. So as people are building queries and are finding different things, you know, through email auditing or validating email auditing, what's kind of the mechanism for, you know, making sure that individual A is sharing with individual B, and
So we have these like standard queries that we have set up already by each audit project that we have, with certain keywords, and then they can further customize it. So there's already like a shell that's created for them. And I think that's helpful. So instead of them like starting from scratch, that's already like keywords that are in there that we have found success with. So we have that shell, that template set up, and then they can further customize that. And, you know, you have to be mindful of, you know, or, you know, and how you structure your queries and what you're including versus excluding. It's really something that it's a skill set that is learned over time. I could show anyone how to do it, but unless they actually start doing the audit and they get involved with the searches, it's like, you really kind of, you keep drilling down, and then you have to have that analytical mindset too. And it's kind of, it's experience driven. Yeah.
So email auditing on the goods for resale side is fairly established. That's what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Are you able to expand it into your procurement team for the goods not for resale audit?
We haven't yet, but we could. We've had, you know, searches where we were trying to like, they referenced an agreement and it's like an excerpt. And I'm like, okay, what was before that email and after that email too? So like, you know, we've asked the clients to like pull that for us, you know, whether it's a certain time period or whatnot, to see kind of, was that, because it was kind of taken like, you know, at a point in time, and it was with, you know, someone that wasn't, you know, was no longer with CVS or something like that. So we want to make sure that we have like the full picture of the excerpt that they're giving to us as proof. So we have on occasion utilize that, but we don't do like a standard poll that we do for the retail side.
that's generally, I mean, my experience as well, that on the GNFR side or the not for resale, non-merchandise side, that you're not seeing as much email auditing. I don't know, Chuck, was your experience any different? I don't.
Something, we don't deliberately capture all of those like we do in the merchandise.
Yep.
Reached and doing this for years. Goods for not resale, you're talking literally company wide, so it's hard to capture.
Yes, some of the problems and challenges I've seen, I've approached that several times with clients asking about capture, if it's not resale, and some of the ops or have been people saying, well, we change up our organization. Pretty standardized. It's going to organize by division, by store, by region. Is it going to be a central office managing the indirect spend? There's just too much switch. The other piece that I've heard is there's just a lot more pushback on the procurement side on having emails ingested versus on the merchandise side where it's a new thing, and as opposed to standard established practice. I don't know. You've seen that.
Same sort of flow that on the GFR side where you have someone becomes a buyer and that's their title. That's Active Directory driven, so they don't have access to systems until they join that AD group. And that's how they show up. Well, okay, now they're in the monitor list. Right, same for us too, decentralized on the GFR side. I'm using the 4.5 times more likely. But the base question before, so you've detected an issue outside of this, and then you find the emails there to help support that. I'm taking that for sure. I'll be 4.5 times more likely to land this if I can go get to any email that speaks to that to strengthen our position.
Yeah.
Flip side, side of that you have 50.
Yeah. Well, hold on to that. I mean,
You mentioned the 4.5 times for the approval for the vendor, and how much success is your team having in when a claim is issued with no support? Like you've done enough research, but you don't know what you don't know, right? So the vendor comes back and has something. How much success are you having finding additional information to keep a claim that was auto deducted, for instance?
I don't have a rate specifically for that, but if we had to, research it.
But that's
we
something
could.
your team is handling, like,
Yeah, I would say, I mean, if the vendor comes up with an email where they're kind of disproving the validity of the claim, it is what it is. I mean, we can further research it, but, we can challenge it for sure, but yeah.
I like to call out though, earlier in the presentation, we said, make sure you see the whole conversation. Because I've seen times where a vendor, supplied information, this understood, and then you look back and see that maybe the genesis of the whole conversation was the client saying, hey, this is wrong, and then they would say, no, it's not. They try to use that, they just got one email, but well, look, I told them. Like, yeah, you told them when they said you were wrong, you know what I mean? And so.
That's my vendor hat that I was wearing, made that statement. So I remember getting post audits and I was like, wait a minute, that was not the last email. And I pull up the last email and I'm like, this was the last email, So we're aligned to that. But yeah, so you want to make sure you have the full picture. Because the deal can change right up until right before the event. So that's why when they say oh, I'm going to do a quarterly email poll, I'm like, wait a minute. Like you got to look 6 to 9 months sometimes. So.
I'm thinking of a specific example, Jenna, you and I worked on where it was an email established something, and it was 2 months later, there was a contract signed that explicitly removed what was agreed to in an email.
Yeah.
It was a 7-figure difference from us finding that context.
Yeah. It's a very valuable tool if used correctly. Sometimes, I think the key I would say is stay focused, but, keep that kind of vision open because you might actually be looking for one thing and you find something else. And so you kind of have to jot it down, but then be like, okay, stay focused. But you may actually run into something, find something you weren't even looking for. And you're like, holy cow, so, or a new program that kicked off, that you didn't even know about. So you kind of have to make sure you keep a good list of, additional opportunities while you're auditing for a specific one. So.
Training our staff on how to use email auditing tools to tell them the task really like that, right? So start with something that's really generic and vague. You don't know what you don't know, right? But then you kind of dig in further from there. There's a lot of opportunities to have that like that.
Right. And we have so many different custodians, and we might think we have a specific search. It's like, you have 20,000 emails. You're like, oh gosh. So you have to make sure that you're drilling down, narrowing the period down. It really is an art in a way.
How hard's the learning curve on that? You mentioned doing is what, helps people figure out.
Yeah, I find that the audit team, once they get involved with it and they kind of see how it's working and see where their success is, that's really, I think it's actually hands-on learning, to be honest with you. You can set them up in the right direction. But I would say, after a couple months,
So really quickly from implement.
I think so. And I think it also depends on the person, and
It's hard work.
it is hard work.
It's going through volumes.
Right.
Emails, like you said, can't imagine.
And yeah, and you have to have the ability to like scan where you can like pick up key points, don't get hung up on other points. So you really have to, but
Stay
yeah,
focused.
stay focused, yeah.
Pizza, ZA.
Pizza. Stay focused on the pizza. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. Right. Right.
There is a concern, and the information security. I really make myself available for anybody who has any concerns. You brought up quite a bit, VP or above might express some concerns about providing the rate, more than happy to push you through it or push them through it as well. I've worked with a lot of that have expressed similar concerns, and the technology provides everything is, and we your utilizes your tool removes sensitive information. Or you use yours, ours. We have multiple layers.
Or methods to remove PI and other sensitive.
Yeah, you don't want social stuff.
In your category,
Great jobs. Thanks.
Press.
Yeah, I think we're done. Or is it still recording?
it